It's May 5th. How's your lawn doing? If you have a lawn, are you aware of how your lawn is doing? We've had the April showers, and it looks like we're having May showers as well. My lawn is kind of a mixed bag, I'll be honest. When we moved into our present home 17 years ago, that's amazing, our yard 17 years ago was absolutely beautiful. Nola Russell sold us her house, and she was amazing as a caretaker of that yard and that property. The yard was beautiful. The trees and the shrubs were meticulously trimmed, and there were flowers everywhere. And the lawn was beautiful, all of it. I wish I could say that it still is. Things have gone downhill a little bit. But there's one thing I've tried really hard to maintain, the lawn in the backyard. Specifically, moss control and dandelion prevention. These are my things in the backyard. And if I do say so, I've been fairly successful. I love looking out the back window of our house and seeing green grass in the backyard. I've used moss killer, which is basically powdered iron. Did you know that? Ferrous sulfate. And I've used fertilizer and a little weed killer, not too much. I have a tool that pulls up those evil dandelions one by one. And I've even aerated, I've thatched, I put down dolomite, and I'll keep doing it. Perhaps I'll do it better in my retirement. Maybe it'll get better. Yep. When you cultivate or create and then cultivate something and you invest in it, either financially or physically or emotionally, it becomes important to see it survive. Yes? This is something of what's going on in the writings of the Apostle Paul. He was a church planter. And it was typical for Paul and others in the early church to move to a community and then begin a house church in that community, and then meet with them on a regular basis, living in community, teaching them and preaching to them from the scriptures about what it meant to follow Christ. And then, after a time when it was established, the apostle would move on. But he would continue tracking with that church by correspondence, letters. We call them epistles. But he would write to them both directly to the church and also to their leaders. And this is what we have in the letter before us this spring in 2 Timothy. This is the second letter between Paul and Timothy. There may have been others, but these two are the ones that we have. 1 and 2 Timothy. So Timothy was the leader in the church in Ephesus, and Paul also wrote letters directly to this congregation, the book that we call Ephesians. He also wrote letters to churches in Rome and Corinth and Galatia, Philippi, Thessalonica, and Colossae. And then he wrote letters to Timothy, of course, and also to Titus. And he wrote one kind of odd letter to someone named Philemon, which is great. If you never read Philemon, you got to read it. It's very, very interesting. But what I want us to notice this morning is that he was basically caring for these churches kind of the same way that I've tried to care for my lawn. He's trying to cultivate the good things, and also he's trying to weed out the things that could potentially cause harm to this young church in Ephesus. And so to do this, Paul has a practice of getting rather specific about the kinds of things that are like weeds growing in the church. And the list of negative behaviors in verses 2 through 5 of our text are almost kind of difficult to listen to, aren't they? Were you kind of wishing as I was going through that list that it was going to be over soon? I mean, really, I think we need to just notice that. And in fact, I want you to hear it again from the Message translation by Eugene Peterson. Listen to this. People are going to be self-absorbed, money hungry, self-promoting, stuck up, profane, contemptuous of parents, crude, coarse, dog eat dog, unbending, slanderers, impulsively wild, savage, cynical, treacherous, ruthless, bloated windbags, addicted to lust, and allergic to God. They'll make a show of religion, but behind the scenes, they're animals. Wow. And this kind of list also shows up in his other letters. It's in Romans chapters 1 and 13. It's in 1 Corinthians 6. It's in Colossians 6. It's in Ephesians 4 and 5. It's in Galatians 5. It's also in 1 Timothy 1. And all the lists they're kind of similar, naming exactly the kinds of things that can be expected to show up in church. In church. Paul is basically not afraid to call a spade, and he wants his young protege Timothy to expect negative influences to show up in his church. He wants all his young churches to expect and to recognize and avoid those who will try to leverage their relationships with vulnerable people for selfish or even evil purposes. He's wanting them to wise up. And he's rather direct about it. After mentioning these 19 different negative behaviors, he concludes by simply saying, avoid these people. Now, is he suggesting that Timothy basically cower in fear and become kind of phobic about certain people? No, I don't believe this is it. Because at other places he encourages Timothy to be strong and courageous. And no, I think this is more on the level of what he is actually saying in another place to the 1 Corinthians and to the congregation in Corinth in 1 Corinthians 15, where he encourages them not to be deceived by others. And then he quotes a Greek poet whose name is Menander. And he says this quote, "Bad company ruins good morals." Amen. Bad company ruins good morals. It's 1 Corinthians 15:33. It's a Greek poet. And Paul is advocating something I think that's really important for us. He's advocating straight thinking. He begins the whole section by warning, you must understand this. Basically, Timothy, don't be naive. This won't be easy. Difficult times are coming. Stay on your guard. Don't be too trusting and innocent. Use your head. This is all really good advice. He says, distressing times will come. So what do you think? Was he right? I mean, look around the world right now. As I was reading that list, were you thinking of things that you've seen recently? For that matter, look at the long, long history of dark moments and even long eras of dark moments since This was written 2,000 years ago. Distressing times? You bet. And you know what? It's always been this way. Sure, there have been seasons of peace. Yes, there have been some good times with good people leading and having their voices heard. But on the whole, folks, the world can be a dark and evil place. And to just know that is important. I don't believe that Paul wants his church and his leaders to all be fearfully trembling in a corner. No, he wants them to stay aware of when they are being influenced. When I was a kid, our teachers and our church leaders would talk to us in the youth group. I know it's hard to imagine that I was ever in a youth group, but I was. And I remember our teachers and our leaders would talk to us about peer pressure. Do you remember all the words about peer pressure when you were young? It was really good for us to hear, I think. I think it still is. Like Paul says, good company, good manners. Bad company, not so good. Ask yourself, am I being influenced by my company? Those with whom I spend my time? At work or at play or my family, whatever it is. Am I being influenced? Paul would say, stay aware of how you're being impacted, how you're being influenced. Are you thinking for yourself, or are you letting others do that for you? But let's take this a step further. I believe we have something else to be aware of in 2024. We are influenced today when we think we're just simply looking at our phones or innocently using social media. I hope you're very aware of this. I believe that if Paul was writing to us today, he'd be saying things like, don't be naive about Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, Google, YouTube, whatever it is you happen to be looking at. Don't be too innocent about that. Don't be naive. Stay aware that content is being sent your way to influence you. Now, what do you do about that? I'm not up here advocating that a total avoidance of social media. Unless you feel like you can live without it, then more power to you. But we live in this world, and I think it's good to be aware. There are a few things that you can do that are just smart. One, and this is going to sound really specific, but believe me, I think this is important. Turn off your notifications. If you have a phone that is beeping at you every time that you get an email, every time that somebody posts something on Instagram, and reconsider that. Turn it off so that you have the option of staying in control of your own time and your attention. There are those who they have a vested interest in getting your attention, and sometimes it's best not to give it to them. So, turn them off. Choose your content and your sources wisely, and just know that just about everyone has an angle, and what you're seeing on your phone or on TV or in print media, just stay aware of that. And of course, be careful with what you post about yourself, about your family, your own information. That's kind of a different subject, but be smart about that. Just be aware of when you're putting details out there. But what's the bottom line here? I mean, what is Paul teaching that relates and applies to us today? He's teaching to stay aware, to not be taken in. to know when you're being influenced for foolish or even evil purposes. So, how do you do that? How do you know when you're being influenced? How do you know when you're being duped? How can you know what's true and what's not true? This strikes me as kind of an important moment for us as a church right now. May 5th, Sunday morning, here we are. Pastor Dan, a few weeks ago, introduced this series about the pastoral transition that's coming for us as a church. And here I am having one of my final opportunities to speak to you as your pastor. It's tempting to get emotional about that. I'm choosing not to. But as I look at this, I think, what should be our heritage as a church? What characterizes us as a church? What's most important? What's most true? It's actually what you would probably guess if you've been around here and listening for even a short time. It's not complicated because it's all about Jesus and what he taught and what he said was most important. And you know what that is. Teacher came to him and said, "What's the most important commandment? What's the greatest commandment?" And what was his answer? Starts with the first word is what? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Matthew 22, 37 to 39. You know. We all know. The most important thing. So, as you're choosing what to watch, what to read, what to consume in terms of content, as you're making those choices, as you're doing that, as you're listening to those around you talk, ask yourself, is this helping me love God? Ask yourself, is this helping me selflessly love others? As you're choosing who to spend time with, ask yourself, is this relationship moving me in a direction of loving God more, being more caring to others? Is it? You have choices. Don't be naive. Wise up. You have the ability to be smart about this. And if we all did that, our heritage will be pleasing to God, won't it? Amen. That's the most important thing. Amen? Amen. Amen. Join me in prayer.